Good evening and welcome to Broadcast. As always, a special welcome if you're joining us for the first time, listening live or listening later. This evening, we're going to be talking about the topic of finances and church planting. If you haven't yet had the chance to read Tom O'Toole's article on the resources page, then please do look out for that and have a read later on. Just a bit of digital housekeeping before we get on with tonight's talk. The way we run these sessions is in two halves. The first 30 minutes are given over to our live speaker, and then the following 30 are given over to our live listeners. So by clicking on the question button that you guys at home that are listening live can type away your questions if you want to have clarity on something that's been said, or seek further wisdom around this topic. So please, we really do encourage you to type away to get the most out of these sessions. So over to tonight, we have the pleasure of the lovely Tim Simmonds to speak about how to plant a church planting movement on a shoestring. Tim himself is a church planter who's been involved in starting several churches in the Manchester area. He also works with other churches in the UK and overseas. So we're very much looking forward to hearing what he's got to say. And so that's it from me for now. Tim, the next 30 minutes are over to you.
Well, hello. Hello. Right. Yes. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you for the welcome. It's good to be on Broadcast again. And we're looking at the issue this evening of how to start a church planting movement on a shoestring budget. And I've been given about half hour to talk. And I don't know if I'll talk that long, but we'll see how we do. And then we'll look at some questions as well, if there are any. You can tweet us or on Facebook as well, I think. So that would be very good. So yeah, we're looking at this issue of how do you start a movement when you haven't got very much money, which most church leaders would probably argue that is their situation. That I don't know many church leaders who say we've got too much cash or we're struggling to spend the money that we've got is a pretty unusual complaint. So let's get started. So personally, the easiest way of beginning this is to talk about CCM. So that's Christ Church Manchester, the church that I'm one of the leaders of in our city, in the glorious city of Manchester, and kind of to talk a little bit about what we're doing and why we think it's cheap. Now, I will talk numbers at certain points, and you and your listening may decide that's not very cheap at all. But we're making up as we go along. We think it's quite cheap. So what we're doing in Manchester is the CCM way, I suppose, is we are planting churches across the city, and that is our dream, to keep doing that, to plant churches across all of Manchester and the surrounding areas, Salford, Trafford, those kind of areas we want to keep planting. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, really. I guess CCM has been doing this probably for about a decade, and we're at 5 sites. We've got 6 meetings in 5 different locations, and we've only just started one in the city centre. And so I feel like we're learning with everyone we do. We're slightly better at it than we were 2 sites ago, and hopefully in a few more sites' time we'll be better again. And someone asked me a few weeks ago, said, okay, well, have you reached the limit of how many you're going to plant? And it honestly had not even occurred to me. It was the question that kind of caught me off guard a little bit. And actually, we want to keep doing this until we retire, till we're taken out in coffins. I think that's what we'd like to do, and hand it on to someone else who will carry on. So there's no limit on the number of churches we'd like to plant. We just want to keep going. That's our plan. And so we think about our finances in those terms as well. So we're not thinking we're on a stretch and then we're going to stop and then we're happy, but actually we want to keep planting. So why do we want to do that? And because I'm speaking quite pragmatically this evening, sometimes it can sound a little bit calculated and soulless, especially when you're talking about money. So it's important to talk a little bit of the why and to give context, because we have a clear philosophy of why we want to do the things that we do, and clear reasons for why we do it, and clear philosophy in the how we do it, I suppose, as well. So we want to plant churches, but we want them to have devotion, community, mission at their core. So for us, a church is devotion, community, and mission. That's what we want to plant. And if we plant somewhere that doesn't have one or two of those things, then we've not done a good job. So we're looking to plant communities of people that are devoted, so devoted to Jesus in every part of their lives. They're looking to work that out together, live that out, that they are worshippers of him. So we're looking to plant churches that engage people on that level, help them to be devoted, help them to grow in their devotion. Community as well. We want the gathered community of God's gathered community in lots of parts of our city. So we want people to love each other, have fun together, laugh together, cry together, serve each other, and to grow together. So we don't think people grow in their devotion on their own in a vacuum. Actually, you do that in community, and that's really important. And mission as well, that each church that we plant, each site that we plant, wants to love and serve Manchester broadly and the community that they are part of. That's really important to us, and that they are a people together who are advancing Jesus' kingdom. So devotion, community, mission is the sort of church that we want to plant, that we're attempting to plant. And it's important to say that, because you could say, oh, we want to plant lots of churches and this is why we do money the way we do. Actually, there's a reason we want to plant churches in that particular way. And we do that with some clear cultures that enable us to do that. And I'm not going to go into them in any great detail now, but we have 5, 6, 7 cultures, which is culture for us is the way we do things around here. That's what we talk about. So we have quite a clear strategy of wanting to plant churches, and we have a kind of culture that we think will make those good churches. So there's no point planting churches with a workaholic, grumpy culture, because that will not produce very nice people or very effective churches or very worshipful churches. So we want to produce them in the right way. And for us, culture makes strategy happen. That's what we want to do. And the how of that is quite important as well. So before we talk about the money, the how is that we have what we are calling now a multi-planting model. So we would describe ourselves as a multi-planting church, which is kind of similar to multi-site, but there's a few differences. So for us, we realized that growth would come to us, growth in terms of the number of people that we have, the devotion of our people, the community activity of our people, the mission activity of our people. That growth would come when we planted something new. So we realized we had to plant to gather. And that we weren't going to be able to gather in order to then plant. So we had to plant in order to see mission advance, community advance, and devotion advance. And that was important for us. We were, when we started this journey, not a big church. I think 40 or 50 people. I mean, we're not a particularly big church now. We're 300 people, but we weren't a big church that was stuck in a building. We'd reached the limits of what we could do. We were a small church, actually meeting in a huge cavernous building at the time, and realised actually we wanted to plant in lots of different parts of the city. So we started with kind of entrepreneuring at the beginning of it, entrepreneuring to grow, not to solve a building problem, which is a bit of a sweeping statement about multi-site. It isn't true for many multi-sites, but you kind of get my point. And so we started with one church of 50 people. And that one church planted a small team, which effectively grew to about 50. That planted another church that sent out another small team, that another church sent out another small team. And so that's kind of been our journey a little bit, to the point now we have, like I said, 5 locations and 6 meetings. And we tend to start a new site, a new plant with 15 to 20 people there or thereabouts. Tom O'Toole has just started in the city centre, and I think he has about a core of about 15 or so, 15 plus, and has started on a Sunday. And we do it that way. We're confident that we'll be able to grow and add people to that. And we are aiming for, and it's always a bit weird when you talk about aiming for a number, because we're aiming for devotion, community, mission. But we realise practically 50 to 80 people in one meeting, one community, is probably about our sweet spot. We realize that we know how to do that, and that actually that sort of number is about average for the UK and is average in America as well. That's the kind of average church size. So we decided pragmatically, well, if we aim for the average church size, instead of trying to break the average, which is actually quite hard to do, we would just keep planting. at those sort of sizes. So we aim for to get into about 50 to 80, and usually when we get to around that size, it's planting again. So one of our sites, which is about 4 years old, is now at nearly topping 80 actually, and we're looking to plant maybe 2 out of there. So that's quite exciting. So we aim for that. We also aim to start quickly. So we start one new site about every 18 months or so. That's our current pace, and we hope to increase that over the next kind of couple of years, to plant a bit more often. I guess as you get momentum, that gets easier. We have high volunteer engagement, so we kind of have to do that. You're forced to do that when you're 50 to 80 people. Really, it's all hands on deck all the time, which is, I think, a great discipleship thing, to be honest. And we're a church of 300 people, but we are 6 meetings. So that means there's a lot of people engaged at a lot of levels to do a lot of things, which is important to us. We also have a very low bar of leadership, which is, why I get to be here, why we let people like Tom have any sort of say in this thing. We decide that actually, for me, I knew that I wasn't leading anywhere else. I wasn't a church leader they recruited. I was a guy that hadn't led any church or anything like that. And most of our site leaders, that would be true, that they've all kind of come through our ranks and been brought through. So we have a low bar to let people in and a high bar that we try and help them to get to. And we try and devolve as much kind of decision-making power, so to speak, out to our site leaders and to their teams. And we also try and involve as many of them in the centre, or the kind of operational centre of CCM as well. That's quite important to us in multi-planting. And like I've said, we start small. So that's kind of the way we do things. And all of that means, so our way of doing things, devotion, community, mission, our multi-planting model, all of that means that we try to do things really very cheaply. And we do it because we want to keep doing this at a pace and quite regularly. And it tends to be easy to do things at a pace and to do these things regularly, to keep planting, when it isn't massively expensive. You tend to get nervous when you're spending big amounts of money, so you get risk averse when you're spending big amounts of money. And we are trying to spend really relatively small amounts on each site. So I was working this out today. Me and our treasurer, every time we do a new budget, yearly budget, and we know we've got a site plan that year, we budget for £10,000. We think the first year to plant a new site will cost us 10 grand. And that has kind of borne out over a number of sites, actually. And that's usually based on the fact that half of that roughly is venue costs. So the new site has gone through the phase of kind of midweek group, prayer meeting, core team gathered, and then they're at the 15 or 20, and then they're starting a Sunday meeting, and that costs venue. So usually up until that point, they've been free. And then this point, they cost venue hire, and then a day a week staff is usually what we try and give to it. And actually some of I think one of our sites, the first year the guy wasn't on staff. He was a volunteer. We didn't pay him, so that was really cheap. But we've realised that a day a week staff, that gives enough time really to run a meeting and to innovate a little bit, and entrepreneur, and get people in. And that's year one. So that's how cheap we try and do it. And we kind of operate with a few principles in how we think about our money. And they're a little bit intuitive. So I've been thinking about this and writing these down, and actually they've developed over a bit of time, and they've developed because we've been blessed with some very gifted people financially, and some gifted leaders as well. And so these haven't all just come out of my head, they've come out of numbers of people working together. So I'm going to give you 6 principles that we work for in order to start a church planting movement on a shoestring budget. And our dream really is that our next phase that we're praying for is that we would get 8 sites and 500 people. That's kind of our next phase that we're working towards. And then after that, I should think we'll be looking at similar kind of numbers all over again, whether we're looking at how we get 1,000 people in 10, 12, 13 sites. We'll have to see. But we want to keep planting. And so we're thinking, okay, well, what are our principles for how we budget this? And the first principle, which is glaringly obvious, is we have a tight budget. Now, I'm sure every church planter and church leader on the face of the earth would say we have a tight budget. But let me explain what I mean by that. So it's tight in the fact that it's well organised. So we gather lots and lots of information. Our information that we have is up to date for the day. We try and keep all of our site leaders very well informed as to the money they're spending and the money that they're getting. We involve them very much in that. So we have a kind of up-to-date tracking, that's the word, of our income. So we know exactly what we're getting in. We can plan over a whole year because we can largely predict what we're going to get over that year based on what we've got over a number of years now. So we have pretty good history of working out what our income is and also our outgoings as well. So we set a budget for as much as we possibly can. And because we've been doing it a few years now, you kind of know all the costs that are coming in. So we have a pretty tight understanding of our outgoings as well. And it's tight, I suppose, because numbers of people get to know their budgets. So all the site leaders will know exactly what they've got to spend and what we expect they're going to get in. And then they can work within those parameters. So yeah, like I said, we have good projected spend, good projected income, and we set income targets as well for our site leaders, which again sounds very pragmatic when you're talking about people's giving. And we talk about giving as being it's worship, isn't it? So we're pragmatically talking about people's worship in a strange way, but I think it's helpful to demystify it and talk about it very pragmatically. And obviously we look to be very diligent in how we stretch what we have, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And that's really important. And we've been blessed, actually. We have excellent trustees who are totally on board with how we want to do things. They hold us to account really well. We have a brilliant treasurer as well who built us, because he's a genius, a bespoke finance system for a multi-site church, particularly a multi-planting church. Actually, the system we have now, I've seen the systems that some churches have much bigger than us, 1,000 people use, and ours holds up very well against them. So that's really important. In terms of those sort of systems and structures, I won't go into loads of detail because it's a bit dull. But in terms of income and things like that, and giving, and how you work out systems for that, there's a book by a guy called Nelson Searcy, his book called Maximize, that we read as a leadership together about 4 or 5 years ago. And that was very provocative. We didn't do everything that he said to do, because there are some American things which would be a bit slightly culturally different, but more pragmatically how they're organized different in terms of gift aid and things like that, which are different to us. But it's worth reading just because his philosophy, which we'll come to again in a bit, was, for me personally, I found really helpful, very liberating indeed. So we have a tight budget. The second principle that we have is we have a faith budget as well. So every year that I've been here, we have planned to spend more than we get. So in the first year up here, the church recruited me and said, we'll pay you full time for a year. And I was like, great, I'll take the job, it's fine. And it was only after that I realized that by them agreeing to pay me full time, they were effectively planning to empty their bank account onto me. And it never happened. By the end of the year, the money that they planned to spend on me was still there. And we've done that every year since, plans to spend more than we think we're going to get. And that's deliberate, actually, because that sort of faith step keeps you motivated for financial health, doesn't it? When you think you're going to lose money that people have given to you as part of their worship, it keeps you very attentive on what you're doing. So usually we're budgeting to lose about 10 grand most years. This year, actually, it was a lower one. We're budgeting to lose about 6 grand, I think it was, which isn't too bad. And part of that budget also sees projected increase in giving as well. So if we don't match that, it could be a bigger loss, but we'll see, it'll be fine. So we usually actually budgeting to lose the amount it costs to plant a site. So each site is a step out for us in faith. And that's important, actually, and the trustees are wonderful and are always wanting us to do that. They're keen for us to do that, so which is exciting. So we have a tight budget, which actually honours the trustees as well, knowing that we're diligent and well organised, and a faith budget, which also honours everybody. We're in this together. We want to do something very big. We want to do something exciting, something that we get to tell our kids about. And part of that is how we spend our money. The third principle is that we start small and we dream big, which is I've been thinking about this one quite a bit. Like I've said, each site starts with 15 to 20 people and is very cheap. So 10 grand, I think. I know other multi-site churches where they're sending sometimes 100 people to start a new site, or more, maybe about 40 or 50 people, and there sometimes there's a full-timer there or someone on 3 days a week, and the venue's quite expensive and they're spending a lot more, and we're trying to go really cheap. One of our guys was planning a site in a room that was about 150 quid a week, and we had to think about it quite big because that was a bit more than usual for an early one, for early startup. So we try and start small, dream big, and all sites that we plant start with the intention of planting again real quickly. So we're not waiting for it to get to 150, we're waiting for it to get to 50 and then have someone with a real desire to go and start somewhere else. And we do that regularly, and actually it's become a little bit part of the lifeblood of the church. It's how we've discipled ourselves, I suppose, to in terms of smallness and entrepreneuring and going again. And that's quite an important part of what we do. And the starting small, dreaming big means we start each site as an investment, but the dream is that they become a contributor. That's our hope, that actually the sites are interdependent on each other. So we try not to get in the situation where the site planter wants to grow it just so that they can go from 1 day to 2 or 3 days salary. We want them to grow it so they can be a net contributor to a church planting movement in the whole city. And so it isn't just about that one area. So we want all of our sites to be able to contribute to planting a new site somewhere else, somewhere very different, maybe a very poor part of the city, and then to all feel ownership of it. And so we start small, we dream big, and that's an important part of it. So, for example, when I first moved up, there was one site in Gorton, one of the poorest parts of Manchester, but that site funded church planting into Fallowfields and probably into Withington as well, was a huge contributor to the whole city. And so that kind of became very important to us, that actually everywhere, every site is a contributor to the whole city, not just to itself. The fourth principle is slightly more practical, pragmatic, is that we are part-time and we are bivocational, which would be true for everybody at some point and for most of us now. So we are built on part-time staff. Now, to be an entrepreneur, to plant, or even to start a new business, actually, the money that you want to invest is in growing something, not necessarily in paying yourself. If you can live cheap or have multiple income streams, that means you're leaving money which can be invested in other things, perhaps other staff members with other skills, or projects or initiatives that are going to grow your church, grow your business, whatever it may be. So part-time and bivocational became quite important to us. So all of our staff, well, most of our staff, so all of our staff, let's say at some point, have been part-time and had extra income. So we currently have 8 staff, and only 2 of those are full-time. So that would be, I'm one of the full-timers, Colin Barron is another full-timer, although not strictly speaking. And I've only been full-time since last year, summer last year. And up until then, for about 6 years, I was part-time, and that was important. And I earned money in other places. So I had a few other kind of 1 day a week jobs. But also my wife, Vicky, she works as well part-time, and our kids are at the stage where I would do some childcare by being part-time, and she would do some childcare by being part-time. And actually, that's a pretty good model for how it's working for a number of our people, actually. So we have numbers of people who only give a day a week working for us and have other jobs as well. And that's quite important. And so there is an expectation of part-time. And we never promise full-time to anybody, really. When I started my first year, I was full-time. And then actually it was only about 10 months. And at 10 months, I got dropped to part-time. And it was made very clear, this may never go full-time again. You have to plan to other ways of earning money, other ways of making a living, which would be true for us. For any of our people that work for us now, there is no promise of full-time. And that's quite important. And it means for us, actually, the part-time bivocational means as a church, as an organization, that it's quite easy for us to take employment steps. So it's real hard to employ someone full-time to be a member of staff. especially in church planting, but in church generally, because that's a big lump of cash. And so it takes a lot of debating whether you want to spend, actually, even for a cheap member of staff, with everything costed in, could be 30 grand for a full-time member of staff, let's say. That's a lot of money for us. So, but it's much easier to say, look, why don't you come and work for us one day a week? That's a much easier financial step. So the trustees feel much happier. We feel much happier. It's easy to budget that in for numbers of people, and it takes the pressure off us as a church. So it means somebody hasn't built their life on full-time work with us, and it also takes the pressure off the planter, because often we're paying planters a day a week. It takes the pressure off them thinking this thing's got to succeed because this church is paying a lot of money on me. And you say, actually, if this thing grows slowly, I'm only being paid a day and 2 days a week. Actually, that gives more room for moving. It's not as dramatic if the thing doesn't work out, but also it gives some space. So that's quite useful for us. Our fifth principle is discipleship. So how a church runs its budgets, its finances, is an opportunity to disciple in money. And Jesus talked a huge amount about money, and perhaps us church leaders tend to be scared of talking about money. We feel like there's baggage there, although I think that's more in the mind of church leaders often than in the people of the church, to be honest. And so for us, discipleship is really very important. It's something Nelson Searcy says when he talks about maximize. He talks about how to develop income and giving within your church. And he says the first principle is this is a discipleship issue. This is not a fundraising issue. So we're not fundraisers, we are disciplers. That's really important. So we want to be very transparent as a church. So we give yearly financial reports to everyone at CCM, which I'm sure other churches do as well. I'm just saying what we do. We do that. We talk a lot about what Jesus says about money. We talk a lot about that. We usually do in each site a sermon series on giving. Usually we talk about giving to the church, attitude to money, attitude to saving, attitudes to debt, those sorts of things. We'll do a sermon series around those issues, and we'll do that usually once a year, once every 18 months in every site. We do two special offering Sundays every year, one which goes into a particular budgetary line in church, whether that's a mission or events that we've got to do or something like that. And the other one we give away, usually to projects working with the poor in Manchester or internationally as well. We've done two. And those special offerings, because we give away the biggest money we've ever raised, we've given away again. And actually that teaches generosity. And so whenever we talk about giving, and we talk about finances, we do it often, and we talk about it in terms of discipleship, in terms of this is a worship issue for us. So the church's finances, how we run things, is a worship issue. And that's really important for us as staff as we spend, for our trustees as they watch over kind of what we do, knowing that we're all trying to do this to worship God. So that makes us diligent as well. That's really important. And the final one is generosity. So we've looked at principles are we've tight budget, we have faith budget, we start small but we dream big, we're part-time and bivocational, it's discipleship, and finally it's generosity. So we want to give away, that's a dream for us, we want to give away stacks of cash. And I know other churches do this as well, but this feels important for us in terms of wanting to start a church planting movement. Generosity is really important, and we've tried to build this in to us as a church by some of the things we fund. So Broadcast, this thing at the moment, we built this, we designed this as a church planting kind of training resource and support for church planters, whether we planted them, whether they found us on the internet, whoever it was. And we set this up, and we pay for most of this ourselves, and we charge nobody for it. So when we first set it up, we thought, well, maybe we can charge, maybe we can kind of recoup some costs. And we realized actually we don't want to do that at all. We want to give everything away. We want to use this as an opportunity to worship, and that's important for us. We set up a theology training school in CCM, which is a monthly training, just one Saturday morning a month, really high standard, excellent speakers that we get coming in from all over the country, actually, really talented people. And this is all paid for by CCM. and lots of our people go, but actually numbers of people from other churches have started coming along now as well now, and we're saying this is completely free. We want no money from you at all. Actually, this is worship for us. Also run a school of leadership on a similar principle as well. All of our interns, our year teamers, we don't ask them to raise any money to do anything with us. We pay for all of their training. So generosity is really important to us as well. That's a principle. We try to give away as much as we possibly can for free. As much as we can. That's an important principle. So principles, tight budget. Okay, we want to be well organized, have great information, really up to date. We want people to know that information. That's really important. And we have a faith budget, so we're always budgeting to spend more than we get. That's important. It keeps us diligent, keeps us on our toes, keeps us motivated. We want to start small and dream big. So we start with a small church plant, but those 15 to 20 people become net contributors to a church planting movement in the whole city. It's important. They're not just growing in order to establish themselves as their own little unit. They're growing in order to support the whole of Christchurch, Manchester. We're part-time and bivocational. Most of our staff are part-time. All of them have been part-time. And that's important to us. We employ usually 1 day at a time to keep things cheap, to keep things growing. This is discipleship for us. We want to disciple our church, our people, in how to be good with money, how to be generous with money. And finally, we want to be generous. We want to give away lots of what we have to our own people, but also to the wider church as well. So for us, that's kind of how we're thinking. How do we start a church planting movement on a shoestring budget? And there are principles. And I hope next year that we're going to be able to plant 2 more churches, which would take us up to 8 meetings in 7 locations, which would be brilliant. So yeah, there you go. I'm finished. Hannah and Tom, if you want to copy back in so I don't just feel like I'm talking to myself, that will be excellent.
And we're back. Superb. Thank you so much. Well, we have a few questions that have been coming in whilst you've been talking, Tim. So let's work backwards, I think, this time, rather than start at the beginning. There was a question that had come in. It was this, you talked about the joint financial review. The question was, is this presented at individual sites or in a meeting format, or is it a report that's handed out? What does that look like?
We do it as a handed out report. So yes, this year I sent a letter to everybody via their site. So they got handed out on the Sunday, and we sent it around as an email as well. So that tends to be how we do it. We haven't ever done it in a big meeting. We have sometimes, and as part of our offerings on Sundays, given little updates. But we found that people weren't really listening. So some people aren't that interested. The interested people tend to read and then ask questions. And most people just seem to want to know that there was money there and we weren't being stupid. So, yeah.
That's a very good answer. Me, not being a particularly money person, would appreciate that very much. But I also appreciate the people that love this subject as well. So talking about trustees, and obviously you're talking about your the multi-planting model. Will it be always that you will have trustees, a set of trustees that will serve all of the sites, same with the treasurer for all of the sites, or will you ever look to separate these out?
You can never say never. I would hope not. So our strength is that they're interdependent, and that they all work together. And the strength of, so one of the difficult things about being a church plant is sometimes there's really not many of you, and perhaps all the people you've got can't count, or are mathematically illiterate, or just don't care about money. And so it then falls just to the church planter to work out all of the budgets themselves, to run the finances themselves, to probably be a trustee, to do all of those things. There are other things that trustees do, child protection, employment law, just loads and loads of things like that. And one of the benefits of us all being together is that means church planters can concentrate on church planting and not have to worry about boring things that have already been done. So they don't have to kind of become a charity all of themselves and go through all of that. Actually, we can plant a church pretty quickly in a difficult part of the city, and they're already set up. Policies and procedures kind of roll over to them as well. So it feels to me that's a pretty good way at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, very good, very good. Pooling resources. Okay, that's an excellent one. Let's go right back then. And the question that came in fairly near the beginning was this one. How much attention should a brand new church planter who has 15 people with them give to finance? What financial systems should they put in place straight away, and what comes later?
It's a great question. Well, if it was me, if I left Manchester and moved to another city and planted a church, I was on my own, and I had that 15 to 20 people, and that was it. And then I'd pay a huge amount of attention to the money. It wouldn't take long because there wouldn't be that much money to pay attention to. But I would be setting, like anything, you set what your vision is, what you want to achieve, and then you set your finances in order to be able to do that. So as a church planner, I would be paying attention to my own personal finances. So what money am I earning for myself? And that doesn't have to be out of the church, it can be out of other places, other jobs. And therefore, because usually the church planter is the most expensive thing in the plant at that stage. And therefore, the money that people are contributing can be used for lots of other things. But I think it's important to have really good records early on because it builds trust. I think it's good to have good systems in place because, again, it builds trust. It shows competence. I think it's quite biblical to think, actually, the small thing I've got to look after it really well. And also, I think when you have a good understanding of the money you've got, you can actually talk to people about giving. And it's not just then, oh, can you give to the church? That would really help us, because there's always follow-up questions. Well, how much money have you got? And if you're saying, oh, I don't really know, then I'm not going to give you any money because I don't trust you. So I would look at it quick and in detail early on and build some systems quickly. So to be able to see what you're spending on in your first year, you're recording everything you spend on, you realize you've overspent, then at least you know where you've overspent and you can adjust. And also knowing where your money is coming from, which some church leaders struggle with, the idea of knowing who gives money. But if you're a church planner, you have to know because nobody else is going to know. So in terms of that, that's quite important as well for bringing leaders through and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. That's a really helpful answer. We have got, you talked about talking about overspending and looking at where you've done that and analysing what you spent your things on. The question came in, what things have you seen lots of church planters spending money on that actually isn't very necessary? That's a good question.
Usually themselves. That would probably be the thing. So Colin Barron would often say that what usually the first spending mistake that church planters make it is on either their own salaries or on the next person that they employ. And so I guess we try and spend our money on things that are going to grow the church. So we've actually been quite slack on administration and things like that. And we're only just in the last year or so have put that right a little bit and have realized we need to put it right even more, I think. So I think, I think church planters can not overpay themselves necessarily, but can try and get full time too quickly. And if you can hold back from that and employ someone else, that can be a really helpful thing. Or perhaps going for a venue, which is ridiculous, can be something as well, which can just cripple you if you're not careful.
Can you just you said about spending your money paying somebody else? What did you mean there?
So your first employment decision has to be, sometimes you think, I just want to employ someone who's going to take away the jobs from me that I hate doing or that I'm not very good at, which can be a very natural thing to think. But actually, that may not grow the church. You may have employed someone who's going to make your life easier, but the church it won't grow them as disciples. It won't grow them numerically. And so your first employment decision has to be, who can I employ who's going to help me add more people to this? Because if you add more people, talking pragmatically and coldly about this, you add more money, really. People are going to give more. And then actually you might, at that point, be able to employ someone who can take some of the admin, for example, off you. So I think that for me, that you think, okay, can I employ someone who is going to grow us in discipleship and in number? I think that's a really important thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's really helpful. Bit of clarity there. And in terms of employing people, you mentioned about you had somebody from one of your sites that wasn't, giving 1 day a week, was a volunteer, I think you referred to them as. Do you still have any sites that are up and running with no paid leaders? Or do you feel, go on then, do you just want to comment on that?
Yeah. So the guys in Gorton, actually the leader of the Gorton church, he's self-employed in his job, and he runs the church in his spare time. And he has a really good team of people there. Actually, we have 2 senior leaders in that site, and they are both full time. One of them is retired, so just gives a whole bunch of time volunteering. He's our chair of trustees as well, and the world would stop spinning without him a little bit. And then the guy who leads the site there, he's self-employed. He sells rugs online and makes a very good living out of it. Does very well, and does all of his church stuff in his spare time. And he's at the stage of life where his kids are at university, and so I'm speaking for him. I'm guessing maybe it's easier now than when his kids were little, but he's just set up his life in a way that he can do it now, which is ace. So those guys do really well over there.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. That's helpful. Okay, back to another question that came in earlier. When and how do you encourage people in your church plant's core team to give financially? That might be quite straightforward, that one, but see what you say.
I talk about it from early on straight away. So it's actually, I would think if you go at the stage of 15 to 20, if you're planting, you're probably not thinking about yourself being paid. You're probably at the midweek community group stage, looking at a Sunday meeting and working out how you can do it in your spare time. And so then I'd be saying, look, we're all in this together. We need to reflect Jesus to our town. Jesus said these things about money. So let's all start giving into this a bank account. We'll set up a charity. So I think you should do it straight away. Be very clear and say, if we put money into these things, then we can hire a venue. We can buy a PA, we can give to the poor, we can run an alpha course. I think that should be an exciting thing and not a scary thing. We shouldn't be scared of asking that stuff. I think that should be a really exciting thing.
Yeah, okay. And of course, if you haven't got the blessing of the multi-site dynamic and you're meeting in a home, but you've got a core, of course, you haven't got venue costs at that point, have you? So people can be giving into a pot, which might be a bit of a startup fund anyway, if you've got no other means of a startup fund. So it works that way, doesn't it? Right. If a church wants to plant again and doesn't have a 10 grand in the budget to fund the first year, how would you suggest they go about doing it? Well, got the startup fund.
Yeah. So our 10 grand is, I assume that 4 or 5 grand of that is for a venue, and 4 or 5 grand of that is to pay someone 1 day a week. So that's our assumption. So you can easily half that by not paying someone and kind of do it on volunteer basis. I mean, if you've got a church that want to do that, let's go on what I've talked about. There's maybe 50 of you, and you've realised that there's always a faith element to this. So I actually said when I was talking that most times we look to spend more than we think we're going to get, and that is usually around the 10 grand mark. So when we're planting, we're usually looking to stretch out in a way that we haven't got, and it's a kingdom principle there. You have to push through that. So I mean, there are lots of ways around it. You can talk very publicly. This is what we want to do. This is going to cost us money. It'd be great to increase giving. We're going for this increase over the year, or to do a special offering for it, or whatever may be. There's usually a bunch of things you can do to make things cheap. Actually, when we planted the first one that I planted in Fallowfields, I was allowed to meet in a bar for 20 quid a week. And that did us fine for the first year. And currently we're using a venue which costs 60 quid a week for one of our other ones. So there are ways of, it doesn't have to be expensive. Now, if you're planning in London, it's a whole different ball game, or even the centre of Manchester, it's more expensive. But there are ways to do it, and it should be that way. I think it shouldn't be easy. I think you should have to talk about money and work out how you're going to raise money. I think if you can learn to do that, then you can do it again.
Yeah. And in terms of just the income and managing when you're starting off, you obviously, a model that you're using is the bivocational, with the exception of that one that you've got where the guy is self-employed. What sort of jobs are going to work best in this kind of scenario? And are there any jobs that you think that actually don't work quite so well? You've seen people kind of try to do that and it actually not work at all.
I don't know about that, to be honest. I mean, I think something that we say to people, so some of the guys I work with who are planting churches are kind of on the front line and really small team. Sometimes it's any job just to get yourself moving. And then I always say, look, whatever you've got energy to do after that is what you can do. And you shouldn't beat yourself up for not being able to do more than that. So some people can just have got all the energy in the world and can fill their every evening with stuff, and it doesn't matter what they're doing at work. And some people, they need to just be honest and real and pace themselves. For us, for me and Vicky, it works because she was a nurse, she is a nurse and working shift, and because actually I was 3 days paid by the church, and actually the church is quite flexible, so sometimes those 3 days could stretch out over 5 or 6 in a week. I could work around her shift work and then look after the kids on other days. So it really depends on your family situation, what you've personally got faith and energy to be able to do. I just think you should kind of pick your sweet spot, what you can do, and be really honest about it, and don't beat yourself up if you can't do more than that. I mean, I know people who have quite high pressure jobs who are quite senior in their organisations. I mean, I know you guys actually work very hard in Swansea outside of your church. And so the question is, therefore, what energy have we got left to be able to do that as well? And you have to be real about how that affects your kids as well as your marriage, as well as all those other things too. So I'm not sure there's a perfect job or a bad job. I think you just have to be real and honest about it.
Yeah, okay. And trust God, I guess, that you get the part-time contract and hours and things that fit, really, isn't it? So like I said, it's a faith thing. Okay, so we're coming to the end. We've got a couple more questions. And they're kind of linked, so I'll read them both and you can kind of give some wisdom on how these fit, the answers. So we've got a question about the fact that you're again, back to the multi-planting model, and you're planting into different areas. Do you find one area is superseding income targets that is then subsidising the lower income sites, and how that works? A comment on that. And another question on that really is the amount of money each site of the multi-plant gets to spend directly linked to the amount they bring in?
Yeah. We find some sites that exceed what they exceed the money that we expect, and we see others that don't do as well. And I'm fine with both of those things. So when we started, when me and Vicky joined, it was just one church in Gorton, which is a poorer side of the city. The regeneration hasn't reached there. It tends to be low-income families and asylum seekers. And just much more social problems, areas that every city has got. And that church funded a plant into Studentville and the more middle class area. So it was the wrong way round. And most other churches would do it the other way, and the middle class area funds this. And actually I think it was just really good for us. And it built something in there, thinking actually these guys gave a lot of money that was spent on other people. And spent on a church that they didn't go to. They didn't get the kids' work. They didn't get the worship band. They didn't get the pastoral support from the people they paid for. And actually, there's an important principle in that for us in CCM. I think actually we want to give away, and so there is no correlation between how much a site spends and how much it gets at all. We do when a new site starts, a brand new one. we don't throw like 3 days staff time at a site with only 15 people. We just don't. That's not fair. Well, fair is the wrong word. That's just, I don't know what they do with that much time and those that many people. I know that I didn't need that much time early on because of the multi-planting model. It's much more shared around. So the interdependent thing is really important for us. I think we want there to be some sites which give a lot more and the money goes to other places, and that's a really important part of their narrative and their story, that this is what we do. But it's also really important that people in poorer parts of the city understand that actually what they give affects the church and the whole of Manchester. They're not basket cases who are being supported by the rich people. Actually, we are all in this together. We're an interdependent group, and we all contribute when we plant a church. So the guys in Gorton, in Withington, in Burnage, where I leads, in Fallowfield, are all involved financially, and as we pray as well, but in finance in the city centre plant, and that's really important. And all of us are involved in Gorton. And most of us will never go there, but actually it's really important to us and our money helps run it. And it's true for everywhere. So that feels like it's that's how it works at the moment. And that might work like that because of the size. I mean, if we got to 10 sites, it could be a different ball game. And we've not hugely been in a situation where one site is bleeding money and causing difficulty. We haven't been there yet. And that's partly because of the size we're at. We don't go for things that are very costly at this stage. So it's been relatively simple. So it might be worth asking me that question in 5 years' time when it might be a different story. So yeah.
We'll book that in now then, shall we?
I'll enjoy it.
Well, do you know what, Tim? I think actually our questions have they have come to an end. So people have been satisfied with everything and not asking for more at the moment. So thank you. I think that just about draws this particular session to a close. Is there any other comments you want to make at this point, Tim, before I wrap up?
No, all good. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Tim, for sharing with us this evening. And thank you to everybody who has listened live, and to many of you who are watching on catch up, I'll say on demand, afterwards, because we know many of you do, and many of you share these resources with other people you know that will benefit and be encouraged by listening to these broadcasts. So please do, as I said at the beginning, take a look at our website and look at the resources on there. Read the article written by Tom. It really is good stuff. And just to say that the next podcast is actually this month, continuing our theme. And Tim mentioned about bivocational, and it's quite handy that on the 22nd of March, in 2 weeks' time, we're actually going to be having a talk all about planting churches and tent making. So if that's going to be something you feel is for you, then put the date in the diary, or indeed share this with somebody you think this might really encourage and benefit. So not long to wait until that one. And so I think that wraps up tonight's broadcast. I will be back on that 22nd, so I will be seeing you then. Until then, it's a very good night from myself and the rest of the broadcast team. God bless.